My name is Mason. I'm 28 years old, and 3 days after my father's funeral, my uncle handed me a small silver key and quietly said, "Your dad wanted only you to open the safe." I had no idea he even owned one. That night, I drove to my childhood home, unlocked the old study, and found the safe hidden behind a painting. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. There was a thick envelope with my name on it, a USB drive, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Don't trust anyone until you watch the video." My heart started racing. I plugged the USB into my laptop, expecting to see old family memories. Instead, my father's face appeared on the screen. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Mason, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and someone in this family is about to betray you." I froze. He explained that over the last year, he'd discovered someone had been secretly forging his signature, moving money between accounts, and trying to convince doctors he was mentally unstable. At first, he thought it was a stranger. Then he found proof it was someone inside the family. He refused to say the name immediately. Instead, he asked me to look inside the envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. There were bank statements, copies of fake signatures, and photographs of my aunt meeting with a lawyer I'd never seen before. I couldn't believe it. My aunt had always been the sweetest person in the family. She brought food every Sunday and cried louder than anyone at the funeral. I wanted to believe there had to be another explanation. The next morning, the entire family gathered at my father's house to discuss the inheritance. My aunt smiled at me and asked if I'd found anything interesting in the study. The question hit me like a punch because nobody knew about the safe except my uncle. I lied and said no. She smiled, but I noticed her hands trembling. After everyone left, I called the lawyer whose business card was inside the envelope. He sighed the moment I mentioned my father's name. He told me my father had spent 8 months collecting evidence because he didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. Then he gave me one final instruction. Don't confront her. Let her think she's winning. 2 days later, my aunt invited me to dinner. She acted kind, asking how I was handling the grief, then casually mentioned that Dad had promised to leave the house to her because she'd taken care of him. It sounded convincing until I remembered something from the video. Dad had said, "The person who lies the most will always talk about loyalty." Suddenly, every conversation I'd ever had with her felt different. I decided to play along. I told her I was overwhelmed and probably wouldn't understand the legal paperwork anyway. Her eyes lit up for just a second. The following afternoon, she arrived with documents and suggested I sign them quickly so we could avoid expensive legal fees. She kept pointing to little sticky notes marked "Sign here." I pretended to read slowly while secretly recording everything on my phone. Then she accidentally admitted that the bank accounts would finally be under her control once I signed. She realized what she'd said and immediately tried to change the subject, but it was too late. The recording captured everything. That evening, I met with my father's lawyer and showed him the audio. He smiled for the first time since we'd met and said, "Your father knew this would happen." A week later, the family gathered again, believing we were finally dividing the inheritance. My aunt arrived wearing black, pretending to be heartbroken. Before anyone signed anything, the lawyer connected a projector to the TV and played my father's video. The room fell silent as Dad calmly explained every forged signature, every missing dollar, and every lie he'd uncovered. Then the lawyer played my recording of my aunt admitting she wanted control of the accounts. She turned pale. Nobody said a word. Finally, my uncle stood up and quietly asked, "Why?" She broke down crying and admitted her husband had lost everything in bad investments. She convinced herself Dad would never notice the missing money and that she deserved it after helping him for years. Maybe part of her story was true, but it didn't erase what she'd done. Dad had changed his will months before his death. Instead of leaving everything to the family, he created a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford college. My aunt didn't receive a single dollar. She walked out without saying goodbye, and none of us stopped her. 6 months later, I visited the first student whose tuition was paid by my father's scholarship. She hugged me and said, "Your dad changed my life." I smiled because, in a way, he still was. That day, I realized something I'll never forget. The greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the truth someone trusts you enough to protect.